Hey, I am sitting here in my home office and thinking about things, and I thought maybe I should share a little tip from my background in educational technology and instructional design to help teachers out there. Now, normally I like to do a video that is really slick, and I write a script beforehand, and I have screenshots, and I spend a little time on it, but I thought, you know what, it's better just to get the information out there. So super quick discussion or explanation rather between synchronous and asynchronous learning. So what you've been doing in your classroom when you're teaching and you're writing on the board and you're using whatever technology is in there is absolutely synchronous learning. That is real-time learning, right? What they have asked you to do is to switch over to synchronous learning online, which means virtual real-time classes online, right? You're using tools like Zoom or Blackboard Collaborate Ultra or Adobe Connect or Skype or WebEx or who knows what you're using to try to just sort of do things without a hitch for your students. Well, what you're running into is, number one, sometimes these things can get overloaded because there are just probably millions more people right now on Zoom or Ultra or whatever. Number two, you're dealing with students who maybe don't have any really good internet connectivity at home. Maybe they have enough to check their email, to get onto a website, but they don't have a good enough connection to actually sit and watch you deliver class in a live synchronous setting. So then you want to go over to offer them some asynchronous options. So asynchronous is where you are going to let students do things on their own schedule. For instance, I got a degree at the University of Arkansas in educational technology. It was completely online. It was almost completely asynchronous learning, which means I would log on after my workday because I worked a full-time job, and I would log on during lunch or after my workday or most likely on the weekends to get to my materials and figure out what I needed to do. Okay, so you're like, yeah, okay, that's great. What do I do then? So here is my big tip for today when you're doing asynchronous learning. You need to set up an assignment that requires your students to pour through the materials. So instead of trying to do like asynchronous where you just post something that says, go read chapter 1 and do, do the questions at the end and be prepared to discuss it on, I don't know, whatever, using the discussion board. Although discussion board is a really great tool. What I'm talking about is saying, okay, you need to write an essay on something. Now, you want to make sure that they can't get online and find somebody else who's written on the same material, because online cheating is a huge thing, and I'm sure it's only going to go up now that a lot of people are going to be online more. So you want to look at, say, your teaching history, and you're like, okay, I need to assign an essay that forces them, without me ever telling them, go read chapters 1 through 4 and be prepared to discuss blah, blah, blah in class. No, it's like, okay, I want to make sure that they go over the material in chapters 1 through 4. And so I'm going to assign, say, an essay that is going to require them to spend a lot of time in chapters 1 through 4 to do a really good job. Hopefully that makes sense. So the next thing also is to maybe assign different essays for different people and then have them presented in a discussion board. Or you can do an online wiki, depending on what kind of materials you have. But like just at the very basics, an essay. So I had to do an essay where we read like a chapter in our textbook, and then I had to go read a children's book and discuss how the children's book was an example of, it was schema theory, actually. And the amount of time I spent poring over schema theory and looking in my textbook and really trying to use those higher analytical level skills in my head to discuss why this children's book was an example of schema theory was intense. And let me tell you, that it was a 2-page essay, double spaced. That is not a lot of time to write about anything. But because I had to spend a lot of time covering the points that we were supposed to discuss in the paper, And, using my resources and making sure I cited my references meant that I spent just way more time poring over that material than if the teacher had just said, go read chapter 1. Okay? I use this in my music class online. I teach a music class online, and I actually teach in real time. So, I'm used to teaching both synchronously and asynchronously. So synchronously, obviously I teach a class. Okay, whatever. We do things in class. But then I'll just assign a discussion board or an essay or both, where I want them to think about something from a different angle. I want them to discuss how this is an example of that, or I want them to go find an example of something with no repetitions. So for instance, word painting is a thing in Renaissance music, in Renaissance choral music. And so they had to go out and find an example on YouTube of word painting in choral music. And it could be a modern example, it could be a Renaissance example, it could be in any language. So what this did for me was it showed me where my lectures weren't enough. Like, I thought I had taught them really well about word painting, and I realized that it's a difficult concept and I needed to take it to a little higher level. So it was good for me to go back and look at their discussions in the essay, or in the discussion, because we did this in the discussion board, and it was good for me to go and see where some of them were getting it and where some of them weren't. And of course, you all know which students struggle more and which students don't. So when I see a struggle across the board, then I know, like, maybe I need to go back and address that again. So that's one thing. But the second thing is I made them spend a lot of time on YouTube listening to choral music and looking at the sheet music and trying to figure out if it was an example of word painting or not. All right? So instead of a short, write a paragraph about word painting, no, you go find an example on YouTube. And by the way, you're not allowed to do anything that we used in class, and you're not allowed to repeat from your classmates on the discussion board. Okay? Those kids spent a whole lot of time thinking about word painting and going to find examples of word painting, and I was able to correct them and say, you know what, well, you've actually found an example of something else, or yes, this is an example of word painting, woohoo, yay you. So there's just a little bit of thought there of how you can use asynchronous learning techniques in this crazy time that we live in right now, where we're trying to make sure our students are learning something and they're using their brains. Hopefully, maybe you will take this back with you into your traditional classroom when you go back, if that's not something that you used before. It can be, okay, everyone has to, do an essay on something, and it's an essay that forces you to pore over the material. I don't know how many hours I spent when I was a student in music reading my music history book, trying to figure out which things were important to study for a unit test, and looking at the summary at the end of the chapter, blah blah blah. But if every semester, well, not every semester, see, this is why I'm not going to edit anything. If every chapter had involved like a discussion board or a little presentation that we had to give, and each person would give it on something different, or an essay where I had to sort of synchronize material and go find something for myself, or figure out something and then present it or write about it, I think that the learning would have been a lot more. What I had to realize as a teacher is that I haven't failed if my student can't spit out chapter 1 like word for word, because that's just not realistic. I have high school students, some of them are going to be stronger than others, right? So what I need to realize is that if I can get them thinking about these key nuggets, dates in Renaissance and this composer and that composer and their date, who cares? Pick the most important concept and go make them do something on that specific concept. And then the other thing is, like I said, choose something that not a lot of people are writing about online. So, for instance, I have an assignment that's going to come up later where we're going to watch an episode of Doctor Who. And we are going to look in that episode for examples of something called Gesamtkunstwerk, which is something that came up during the Romantic period in music history. I promise you, nobody else has this assignment. Now, number one, it's fun because they're going to go watch an episode of Doctor Who. And number two, they have to start thinking about this concept in modern terms, in a television show, I've had students go and look for examples of Gesamtkunstwerk in music videos. So again, I find things that I know somebody who's out there helping people cheat is not necessarily doing. I've had students analyze scenes from various movies. And college students, it was a little bit easier because, I could actually have them watch a more adult film. I've had them listen to radio opera and, do some sort of a discussion on that. It really depends on, of course, your students, what they're doing. But yeah, try to find ways to approach things that somebody out there isn't typing up papers for your students to purchase. Okay, so, oh, look, my phone's ringing and I'm ignoring it. I'm pretty sure it's a robocall. I don't recognize the number. But anyway, hopefully this little bit helped you figure out how to make that transition from a traditional class into an online class, and you realizing that it doesn't have to necessarily be online, virtual, real-time synchronous learning. That you can pull in these asynchronous tools and you can actually get a really, really good result with your students. So anyway, I'm going to go back and do the things that I was doing a little bit while ago. I'm not going to edit this video at all, so you can probably hear my dog wandering around. The washing machine just made a noise. My phone just went off, but I'm going to get this thing out and I'm going to be thinking about other ways I can sort of give you guys some hints going forward. So everyone, what's the thing? Stay healthy, wash your hands, and prayer. A lot of prayer would be good. All right, you guys, have a blessed weekend, and thank you, teachers, for taking this huge leap. I teach one online class. I'm not teaching sort of K through 12 anything. I'm not directing choirs in real time anymore. I'm not dealing with a bunch of third graders online in a virtual setting. So, man, you guys rock and you're awesome. So thank you.